The heavy glass doors of Luminous closed behind me, cutting off the humid city air and replacing it with the cool, scent-evaporating draft of high-end air conditioning. I smoothed down the front of my black Target dress. It was soft, breathable, and cost me exactly $24. On my feet were a pair of black leather flats I'd walked 100 miles in. I looked like a woman who had a budget. My sister, Caroline, looked like a woman who had credit cards and a deep-seated need for validation. She was standing by the hostess podium, draped in a champagne-colored silk cocktail dress that practically radiated dry-clean-only energy. Her husband, Derek, was standing next to her, adjusting the cuffs of a bespoke suit that screamed, "I have a sports car I can't actually handle." "Oh. You actually came," Caroline said as I approached. Her smile was like a poorly applied sticker, peeling at the edges, completely artificial. "I wasn't sure you'd be able to make it." "It's Mom's 60th birthday," I replied, keeping my voice level. "Of course I came." "Well, let's hope you can afford dinner," she whispered, leaning in as the hostess guided us toward the private dining room. "This place is incredibly expensive. Reservations require a 3-month waiting list, but Derek insisted on the best for Mom. Entrees start at $60. I didn't say anything. I just followed the rhythmic clack-clack of her designer heels across the polished concrete floors. We passed tables of tech founders, real estate moguls, and city elite, all of them dining beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the 42nd floor view of the downtown skyline. The city glittered like spilled diamonds below us. The private dining room was at the very back. A long mahogany table set for 12, gleaming with crystal and sterling silver. Mom sat at the head, elegant in navy blue. Dad was next to her, already swirling a glass of scotch. My brother, James, his wife, and a smattering of aunts, uncles, and in-laws filled out the seats. "There she is," Mom said when she saw me. She stood up and gave me a hug. It was warm, but brief. "We were starting to worry you got lost." "Traffic was bad," I said. "Well, you're here now." Mom gestured vaguely toward the far, dark end of the table. "We saved you a seat." Of course they did. I was wedged at the absolute foot of the table, flanked by my 14-year-old nephew, Leo, who was staring blankly into his phone, and an empty chair. The worst seat in the room. Caroline, naturally, took the seat of honor right next to Mom. "Should we order champagne?" Caroline announced loudly, ensuring the entire table heard her. "I think Mom deserves the best tonight. The 2012 Dom Perignon, Derek." "Nothing but the finest," Derek beamed, signaling the server. A young waiter in a crisp black apron stepped forward. "Excellent choice, sir. I'll bring that right out." I watched the performance in silence. Caroline lived for this. She was a senior marketing director at a pharmaceutical firm. Derek ran a mid-sized defense law practice. Together, they brought in about $400,000 a year. To them, that meant they had conquered the world, and they needed everyone, especially me, to know it. When the champagne arrived, the server poured glasses down the line. When he reached me, Caroline held up a manicured hand. "Actually, maybe just water for my sister," she said, giving the waiter a sweet, pitying look. "Champagne is a bit pricey." "I'll have the champagne," I said, my voice cutting through her performance calmly. The server looked between us, caught in the crossfire of a sibling dynamic he clearly hadn't been trained for. "Of course, ma'am," he said quickly, pouring my glass before Caroline could protest. Caroline's smile tightened into a thin, white line. She raised her glass. "To Mom. 60 years of grace, wisdom, and strength. We love you." Glasses clinked. The Dom Perignon was excellent, crisp, with a perfect, tiny bead of carbonation. I took a slow sip. Then came the food. Caroline ordered for the table with casual arrogance, selecting oysters, blue crab cakes, and a delicate butternut squash soup with truffle cream. "Isn't this place incredible?" Caroline whispered loudly across the table to Mom. "Derek found it. Apparently, it's owned by some young entrepreneur who turned it into the hottest reservation in the city." "It's lovely," Mom agreed, looking out at the skyline. Caroline leaned over the empty chair toward me. "Each appetizer is about $30, she murmured under her breath. "Just so you know. I don't want you to be shocked when you see the bill. We're splitting it." "Are we?" I asked quietly. "Well, Derek and I are covering the lion's share," she said condescendingly. "But we thought everyone could chip in a little. Maybe $100 from you, if you can manage it." "I can manage," I said, taking another sip of champagne. The main courses arrived like a parade of culinary art. Pan-seared salmon with microgreens, duck confit, and thick, perfectly charred steaks. "This is a $75 steak," Caroline announced to Aunt Linda, cutting into her meat. "Wagyu beef imported straight from Japan. Derek, you really have excellent taste." Derek practically purred. "Only the best for family." Across the table, James was loudly explaining his new corporate promotion. Aunt Linda was detailing her recent Mediterranean cruise. Everyone was performing. Everyone was showcasing their carefully curated, highly successful lives. I ate my salmon in silence. It was cooked perfectly, the skin shattered like glass under my fork, the flesh tender and flaky. So, how's work? James asked me eventually, shifting his gaze down to my end of the table. He asked the question the way someone might ask about a mildly unpleasant rash. It's good, I said. Still at that little cafe? Caroline chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. What are you now? Assistant manager? Something like that, I replied. This was the narrative they knew. 4 years ago, I had walked away from a grueling corporate finance job. I told the family I was taking some time off to figure things out, and I took a shift work job at a small downtown cafe, making espresso and serving pastries at 6 a.m. What I hadn't told them was that within 6 months of working there, I bought that cafe. And the 3-story historical building it was housed in. And, over the next 4 years, for other restaurants across the metro area. It must be nice, Caroline continued, cutting another piece of Wagyu. Not having any real responsibilities. Just making coffee. No stress. Of course, the pay must be terrible. I manage, I said. I'm sure you do. She patted my hand. And there's no shame in simple work, sweetie. Not everyone is cut out for corporate life. Dad cleared his throat from the head of the table. Caroline, that's enough. What? I'm being supportive. Caroline protested, throwing her hands up. I think it's great she's found something that makes her happy, even if it's not particularly ambitious. Mom deftly changed the subject, steering the conversation towards safer waters, and the food kept coming. Sides of truffle mashed potatoes, roasted asparagus, and artisan breads with imported butter. Dessert was equally extravagant, a chocolate soufflé that had to be ordered at the start of the meal, crème brûlée with fresh berries, and a cheese course featuring varieties I knew for a fact were imported weekly from Europe. This meal must be costing thousands, Aunt Linda said, looking around the empty plates with a mix of awe and guilt. About $4,300 for all of us, Derek confirmed carelessly, checking his designer watch. But Mom is worth it. Caroline squeezed Mom's hand. We wanted tonight to be special. Something you'd remember. It's wonderful, Mom said, a tear gathering in her eye. Thank you both. As the dessert plates were cleared, Caroline leaned across the gap toward me again. So, about that $100. Can you cover it, or is it going to be a problem for your account? It won't be a problem. Good. Because honestly, I wasn't sure if you'd even be able to afford to be here tonight. She said it quietly, just between us, but loud enough for Derek to hear. He smirked into his scotch. I set down my linen napkin and took a slow sip of water. Right on cue, the double doors to the kitchen swung open. Chef Antonio Romano walked out. Antonio was a culinary legend. He had trained in Paris and Rome, earned his first Michelin star at 28, and was the creative force that made Luminous the most sought-after reservation in the state. He almost never left the kitchen during service. He certainly never came out to greet regular guests. But he was walking straight toward our private room now, his white chef's coat pristine, looking directly at the foot of the table. Miss Bennett, Antonio said warmly, stopping right beside my chair. I wanted to personally come out and ensure that everything has been perfect for you this evening. The entire table went dead silent. James stopped mid-sentence. Derek froze with his glass halfway to his mouth. Caroline's fork rattled against her plate. I smiled up at him. Everything has been exceptional, Antonio. Thank you. The salmon was prepared perfectly. To your exact specifications, he nodded, satisfied. And the private room? Is the temperature comfortable? The lighting appropriate? Everything is exactly right, I said. Wonderful. Please let me know if you or your guests need anything at all. It is always an honor to serve you, Miss Bennett. He gave a slight, respectful bow and turned back toward the kitchen. For about 5 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then, Caroline found her voice. It sounded an octave higher than usual. Why did he call you that? Call me what? I asked innocently. Miss Bennett. Why does the executive chef know your name? Why did he come out here to check on your salmon? I took another sip of water, letting the silence stretch just long enough to maximize the weight of the words. Probably because I own the restaurant. The silence that followed was heavy enough to collapse a bridge. Even my nephew, Leo, slowly lowered his phone and looked at me for the first time all night. You, what? Mom whispered weakly. I own Luminous, I said calmly, resting my hands on the table. I bought the property 3 years ago as part of a larger investment portfolio in the hospitality industry. Caroline's face didn't just lose color, it went entirely gray. That's impossible. This restaurant, the annual revenue alone must be. About 3.2 million, I confirmed. After overhead and labor, it's actually one of my most profitable properties. Properties? Dad repeated, his voice cracking on the plural. I own 5 restaurants in the city, I explained, keeping my tone completely matter-of-fact. Luminous is the flagship. But I also own the French bistro in the Arts District, the Italian place on the waterfront, the sushi lounge in Chinatown, and the farm-to-table spot out in the suburbs. Plus the cafe where I work, which I also own, along with the 3-story commercial building it sits in. Under the table, Derek's thumbs were moving frantically over his phone screen. Holy shit, he muttered, his face turning an asymmetric shade of white. She's not lying. Bennett Hospitality Group. That's you. That's me, I nodded. He spun his phone around to show Caroline. I caught a glimpse of the corporate registry screen, my professional headshot, a list of LLCs, and an estimated annual revenue benchmark hovering right around $15 million. But, you work at a cafe, Caroline stammered, her voice sounding tight, almost strangled. You make coffee. I make coffee because I enjoy it, I said. I started that cafe 6 years ago as my first solo venture. I still work the morning shift sometimes because it keeps me grounded. It reminds me of where I started. James was staring at me like I had just levitated off my chair. How did you even afford to buy a restaurant like this? I saved every single dime from my corporate finance days, I told them. Every bonus, every raise, every commission. I lived in a 1,200 square foot studio and drove a used Honda. When I had $60,000, I bought a failing cafe. I turned it around, made it profitable, and used the cash flow to buy the building. Then I repeated the process. But that was only 6 years ago, Aunt Linda whispered, dumbfounded. 6 years of 16-hour days, I said. 6 years of learning supply chains, commercial real estate, and hospitality labor. 6 years of making smart investments and taking calculated risks. Mom's hand was pressed flat against her chest. Why didn't you ever tell us? I looked at her, and for the first time, let a little bit of the underlying sadness show. I tried to, Mom. 4 years ago, when I opened the waterfront property, I invited all of you to the VIP launch. You all said you were too busy. When I finalized the acquisition for Luminous, I called to share the news. You congratulated me, and then immediately spent 20 minutes talking about Caroline's promotion. Caroline's eyes welled with tears, though I couldn't tell if it was from genuine shame or the sheer humiliation of being outclassed at her own game. Every time I tried to share my milestones, I continued quietly, someone changed the subject, or minimized it, or assumed I was just a barista. So I stopped trying. I let you think I was just the sister who made coffee. It was easier than begging for your attention. The dining room door opened again, and the server stepped back in, holding a leather folder. He hesitated, looking at the suddenly frosty atmosphere, and cautiously extended it toward Derek. The check, Mr. Thompson. Derek took it automatically. He opened the folder, looked down at the total, and his throat clicked. $4,318, he read aloud, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Oh, that won't be necessary, I said, pulling out my phone and sending a quick text message to the front desk. I'm comping the table tonight. Consider it my birthday gift to you, Mom. You can't do that, Caroline squeaked. I absolutely can, I said, offering her a small, polite smile. It's my restaurant. I can comp whatever I want. Antonio reappeared a moment later, carrying a dust-covered bottle of wine and a set of fresh glasses. Miss Bennett, I thought your mother might appreciate something from our private cellar for her milestone. À 1982 Château Margaux. With my compliments. He poured a tasting splash into Mom's glass. She took a sip mechanically, her brain clearly short-circuiting from the sheer whiplash of the evening. It's lovely, she whispered. After Antonio left, Dad looked down the long table at me, speaking for the first time since the revelation. 15 million in revenue? Approximately, I said. And we've been worried about you, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, his face red. We've been feeling sorry for you. I offered to lend you money last Christmas. I appreciated the offer, Dad, I said honestly. But I've been fine. More than fine. Caroline was crying openly now, her expensive makeup running slightly at the corners. I've been so condescending to you, she sobbed into a napkin. For years. I've made you feel so small. Yes, I said frankly. You have. I'm sorry, she choked out. I'm so sorry. I thought I was the successful one. I thought I was better than you. I know, I said. But you never corrected me. You never told me I was wrong. I looked her dead in the eye. Would you have listened? She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. The entire table knew the answer. If I had told her 2 years ago, she would have found a way to minimize it, to call it a fluke, or to criticize my lifestyle choices. Mom reached across the table, her fingers stretching as far as they could toward mine. I am so proud of you, honey. I should have said it years ago. I should have listened when you tried to speak. It's okay, Mom. It's not, Mom insisted, her voice thick with emotion. I'm your mother. I should have seen you. Really seen you. James cleared his throat, breaking the heavy emotional weight in the room. So, are you guys hiring? Despite myself, I let out a sharp laugh. Are you seriously asking me for a job right now, James? I mean, you're clearly killing it, he said, holding his hands up defensively. And I hate my regional director position. So, yeah, I'm asking. I'll think about it, I smiled. The rest of the dinner was surreal. The condescension was entirely gone, replaced by a quiet, cautious reverence. People asked me questions about real estate margins, menu curation, and corporate structure. They looked at me like they had never seen me before, and in a way, they hadn't. They had only ever seen the version of me that made them feel better about their own choices. When we finally moved out to the elevators at the end of the night, Caroline stepped in next to me. Before the doors closed, she wrapped her arms around me. Can we have lunch? She whispered into my shoulder. Just us. I want to really talk. I want to really listen this time. I hugged her back, feeling the tension finally drain out of her silk-clad shoulders. I'd like that, Caroline. Mom kissed my cheek as the elevator doors chimed open. My successful daughter, she said softly. I'm sorry it took me so long. You see me now, I told her. That's what matters. I walked out to the parking garage alone, slipped into the driver's seat of my 10-year-old sedan, and started the engine. I drove home through the downtown core, passing 3 of the brick-and-mortar buildings I legally owned, navigating the city where I had built a quiet empire without a single drop of fanfare. My phone sat in the cup holder, buzzing continuously with incoming texts, apologies from aunts, congratulations from uncles, and lunch invitations from my brother. I smiled, reached over, and flipped the phone face down. Tomorrow morning, my alarm would go off at 5 a.m. I'd put on a pair of comfortable jeans, walk into my cafe, tie an apron around my waist, and steam milk for the morning rush. I would live my life exactly the way I wanted to, on my own terms, just like I always had. But tonight, for the very first time, my family finally knew exactly who I was. And it felt incredible.